This is an experiment. We're very lucky and we're very happy to be here. This is an experiment that we have never done really before, but we thought this might be an interesting occasion to put together some of our activities, some of the work we do in trying to make it into a coherent ensemble. Also putting it into the context of Living Knowledge Conference, because what we all work on with Dea and Miguel, we look into how the knowledge of civic society actors, initiatives, cultural actors can be integrated, channeled into urban transformation. So this is the main issue. So we put all the context of the conference into the context of urban transformation. Me, myself, I work with an organization that looks into, well, we do a lot of implementation projects, reusing spaces, but we also work on the level of advocacy with civic organizations, public administrations, and EU organizations as well. And one of the major questions that we ask is that what are the ways of different actors in the city to actively contribute to an urban transformation? How can we make the city more participatory? Of course, this is not a new question. In the 60s, you all know Sherry Arnstein's Ladder of Participation, which looked into what are the different levels of participation. Now, many of these mechanisms, even high level of participation exists in our cities. We work with the city of Paris, for example, where even in organizing local commerce, there are mechanisms to ask the people what they need, what can they contribute to, what are exactly what are their local needs in a neighborhood. And even in a field like local commerce, which many people would think it's up to the market, but there are interventions, there are ways to integrate citizen knowledge and needs into the planning process. And of course, there are many mechanisms by now to integrate citizen proposals into plans. So there are mechanisms to, there's the master plan. I don't know how many of you are familiar with urban planning, but this is the main regulatory instrument for the future development of cities. And we have many mechanisms. For example, the city of Tartu that developed a master plan entirely based on citizen inputs, proposals, and obviously citizen knowledge, local knowledge. But we think that there's another trend in Europe that beyond actually answering questions that administrations make, there's an increasing number of citizen initiatives that are not willing to be integrated into existing channels of participation, but they are creating their own spaces and services built on their own knowledge. I just put up these few images because these are some events in the coming weeks, actually, that are all speaking about city making. And this is somehow the new slogan of making the city, that we all, citizens, we all make the city, mobilizing our local knowledges. We don't have to be very far for this. If you look around in Budapest, if you have some extra time, I suggest you visit, for example, the Urányi House, which is bringing together theater actors, all kinds of theater actors, companies, but also agencies that help them into one building, into one space where they can actually network very efficiently in one space without much public sector help. Or even closer to here, you can go to Cargonomia, which is a small mobility hub that brings together short chain food distribution services with cargo bags and all kinds of sustainable initiatives. Again, mobilizing knowledge that was a little bit scattered around, bringing them into one place and connecting them into actually a very unique service for Budapest. These are experiences that we, for some of you that speak Hungarian, we summarize in our book Civil Város, and we also have related English publications. Now, these kinds of services, these kinds of spaces exist in all fields of urban life. We speak about education, we speak about culture, we speak about all kinds of social services, housing, work, sports. So this is something that we see emerging, that a lot of citizens are ready to produce their own spaces and services. The question that we come to, and this is why we have here Miguel and Dea, is that how can we understand all this knowledge that is around? How can we map the competence of all these civic actors? Because municipalities, even often universities, are not really keen on, they're not really sensitive to the kind of knowledge that is around, and especially less they have the resources, the instruments to collect this knowledge and use them for something aggregated, some something more aggregated action. So I just came a few days ago. I was in Milan with a small festival called Super Festival della Periferia, which is exactly one of these initiatives where you go around in the peripheries of Milan, where the small initiatives working on making life better, making services more accessible, in very problematic neighborhoods, in very problematic conditions. So this is one example that I saw recently. We, a few years ago in Vienna, when we learned that the city of Vienna actually got a very big fund, a €5 million fund to develop a plan for refugee integration together with civil society, we understood that nobody in civic society actually knew about this fund. So we made a call, we made a little mapping of different kind of organizations in Vienna that are already working on this. We put them together in one room with the city of Vienna to put a little bit of pressure on the city of Vienna that there are already people here. So if you say that you will work with these people, here they are, you can work with them. Or there are other initiatives that we work closely with, like in Rotterdam, Afrikaner by Cooperative, that is actually building a very strong local economic tissue by understanding what are the skills and competencies dispersed in neighborhoods which were seen as problematic, disadvantaged, with high unemployment rate, low education rate. But this cooperative realized that there's a lot of people with migrant backgrounds who have amazing skills in working with textile, with food, with all kinds of things, and this knowledge can be mobilized. This knowledge can be turned into an economic capital. You can collect these actors, you can connect these actors, you can create umbrella organizations, and you create local economic power in a neighborhood, just understanding what are the local knowledges and skills are. But I think there are even more interesting initiatives that do this in Europe, and this is why we thought Vivero, the Iniciativa Ciudadanas from Madrid, would be very interesting to have on board, because they've been working on a similar mapping of initiatives and competencies for the last years, not only in Madrid but also across Latin America. And I will give over to Miguel.
Thanks. Well, first of all, thanks to Clemente for the invitation and also for Corvinus and the university. So we are coming from Madrid. We are Vivero de Iniciativas Ciudadanas, VIC, and this is one of our tool. Is a mapping tool called Civics. We will talk about this tool in the evening, I think, more deeply. But Civics is a digital map, interactive and open map. You could check on the web. It's civics.cc. And this map is trying to gather as much as citizen initiatives globally. As Levente mentioned, we call citizen initiatives to these activism, cooperatives, and practices within the city from the emergent and informal practices in the city. So you could find open culture, expanded education, alternative economy, urban art, alternative mobilities, and all this kind of experience around the Ibero-American region. We've been 2 years mapping more than 4,000 initiatives within 30 cities in 20 countries. And this is a tool that allows us to compare and to check very directly the potential local partners for our projects and inspiring initiatives in America that we can share and we can look for in the digital map. So why they are important from our point of view? Because now we are trying to connect these initiatives with the economical context. We are currently working a project called Mares Madrid, which is funded by the European Union, the UEA, European Innovative Actions. And we're trying to work with these 3 layers that you can see over here, We have the formal and consolidated layer, which is the companies, the productive sector. Then we have the informal and emergent activities, which are the citizen initiatives, which somehow they are not formalized, but they are doing some alternative practices in the city, and they are very inspiring. And also the idea and necessity, because we are like asking people not to only protest in their territories and communities, but also they had to propose what are their projects and ideas in order to join the necessities in the form of projects with the citizen initiatives and the formal layer. So now we can see a map here of Vallecas, which is in the south of Madrid. This is the formal layer. These are the main companies based in Vallecas in the mobility sector. And you can see a formal map, which is done by the municipality and their statistics department. And then we have these kind of maps, which are based on civic platform. And we are trying to visualize all the alternative and informal practices in Vallecas also. And then we have the ideas of the communities, their proposals and their requirements or dreams in the form of proposals which could be taken by the public administration. So now we have to join the three layers. In this diagram we call value chain. So this scheme is it's a very simple scheme, but it shows how like production works in formal economy or in capitalism economy. We go from raw materials, production components, and then we fabricate products, and then we distribute to suppliers, and then the suppliers commercialize to consumers. This is like the conventional way of how capitalism or neoliberalism works. But we also have some other services and connections that we are trying to work and open with these citizen initiatives. And then we have the upper part of the diagram are the do-it-yourself ways or services that from consumers they can jump different phases of the diagram, so we can self-distribute our communities like a consumption group. We can create a critical mass and consume directly from a urban garden, for example. And then we can fabricate ourselves, our components, our technology, like these open technologies, or even we can self-produce like energy, water, by using solar panels or whatever. So we can jump using technology and education, and we can empower ourselves and jump these phases of the diagram. Then we have the collaboration between the consumers, so we can share. We can do different practices to share our products. And then we have the circular economy, which is recycle, repair, reuse, renaturalize. So these kind of initiatives, they are looking for different ways and services that they can fulfill the whole diagram. And then we can ask about this kind of budget. For example, GSS, which is social economy, can we find these products and services in social economy? Locally, can we find locally solar panels? No, they are all coming from China. But we have the space, the void, and we have the opportunity maybe to implement this kind of production. The digital, so many of these services are digitalized, but we can change to physical services or digital services. Then we can ask about public services, which of these services and products are done by the public administration. Can we offer a private alternative or in the opposite way? And then the black market and informal. There are, at least in Spain, most of the experience in recycling are sometimes done with the black market or informal practices, so we can put it on the, let's say, regular market. So this chain value, you can rescale. You can do zoom in or zoom out, and you will find some different scales and different faces. But we are trying to escape from the unique way, which is, for example, in cars. Cars are under a very stiff normative law by industry. So to buy a car, we can only follow one line. I cannot build my own car. I cannot change my car from diesel to electricity because I need a lot of normative. And so you can see the way to buy a car is like the canonic or the canon way. But then we can share, car sharing, carpooling, taxi, Uber, blah, blah, blah. We have public transportation, but we can resell, repair, and we have another alternatives for mobility. For example, in ecological foods, we have some other experiments. We have some other ways and, let's see, services from the consumer point of view. And at the end, we want to show this diagram also, which is a maturity diagram. So we have like the projects and people. We are working all the time with projects and people. So as far as you go to the up or to the right, you have more mature, you have more development experiences. So we need to connect projects and person, and we are trying to share information, share knowledge, and share technology in order to advance in this vector, in order to get more developed experiences. So now this is our ecosystem in Mars project, and as you can see, we have different positions of each project, and the force is to gain maturity and gain development in their practices, in their skills and knowledge to develop their projects, their initiatives, in order to create sustainable companies in the private sector around social economy.
And this is back to me. Thank you very much, Miguel. I'm really happy that you use the word ecosystem that frightens and freaks out many people. Can you hear me? Yeah? So, because this is a little bit what we speak about now, how different roles, different knowledge, different competencies can be brought together in meaningful ensembles and meaningful new system and new actions. This is your moment now, because we understood that this conference also wants you to work. It's not only us working, but it's also for you to work. And we would like you to reflect for a few minutes with your neighbor, with your the people before or behind, about the ways you can share your skills with your city, your neighborhood, organizations you work with. So what is maybe the one most important knowledge and skill that you know that others in your surroundings they don't have, and you can offer to them, or what is in your organization? Of course, maybe not a university, because a university has a lot of knowledge coming in. But if you have other roles, what kind of skills your organizations would need from your local ecosystem? Does it make sense? Or if you're a university, maybe how can you reach out and how can you find those knowledge, those skills that are out there and that could help you actually to improve your practice? Yeah? Can we spend 5 minutes with this? Okay, I think you have a lot to tell to each other, and it's great. So I suggest that if you didn't tell everything to your neighbor, maybe you exchange contacts so you can continue this discussion on the long term. If you haven't done so, I would invite you back to have a bit of a discussion with us, and then we open it up, and then we can continue together. So I'm really happy that you had a lot of skills to share with each other. Moving beyond a little bit, understanding and mapping the skills. No, already as Miguel hinted to, our next question that we've been looking into, and especially Dea has been working on for a long time, is, all right, we know many of these initiatives. We know what they do. We know what they know. We know what they need. But how can we bring them together? How can we make them stronger by making them join networks that can work, stronger together? For example, cities in crisis. If you go to Athens, we all know that Athens had a long, complicated crisis, and a lot of public services were taken over by civic initiatives. What could the city do with that a lot of money? The city could do something very interesting. They started to, on the one hand, identify who are the organizations on the ground that are working for a better quality of life. In Athens, you actually have entire hospitals run on voluntary work, which is quite amazing. But can you, as a city, as a public administration, you can map these. You can connect actually the initiatives that work on similar things. So you can help them recognize each other, start working with each other, and you can also understand what are the legal barriers in front of them. No? So you can do actually an analysis of what are the obstacles that these initiatives face. How can you make their work more easier, their life easier, their work more legal? Because many of the problems of informal initiatives in our cities is that they don't enter legal frameworks. This, I guess you also know how complicated a university bureaucracy can be. A municipality is even more complicated than that. But going beyond this, how can we create this kind of collaboration network on a larger scale? How can we think about spaces, for example, on the city scale? And I would like to bring you to Turin, where in the last 20 years, actually, there's been a lot of attempt to create spaces where the municipality and civic initiatives and social enterprises are working together. They're running these spaces together, like Cascina Roccafranca, a former farmhouse, which now hosts hundreds of organizations that run a restaurant with people with employment problems and also capacity problems. They have all kinds of activities that find their place, and this is co-governed by these organizations and the city. It's not that the city gives the space and then you participate and you have your space to maneuver. No, it's co-managed, so you as an organization have almost as much say as the municipality in how to run these spaces. This is another venue also in Turin from a former public bath building, which is again run together by the city and many initiatives to host all kinds of activities. By now, these spaces in Turin have created a citywide network, which is called the Casa del Quartiere, which is, if I calculate well, it's 8 spaces in the city scattered around. They have their citywide network, they have their citywide meetings, so they decide about certain things together, and partly about funding, many decisions. So it's not only that in the level of one neighborhood there's one space that brings together different actors and you decide together with the municipality, but also in the city level all these spaces come together and you can decide. You create a governance network on the level of the city. Another interesting example, we work actually on this project now with the city of Lisbon that started 10 years ago a very interesting funding program that is called Bip Zip, that is on the one hand identifying very problematic neighborhoods with different kinds of through different kinds of statistical data. Again, education, unemployment, aging population, etc., etc. And they started targeted funding towards these neighborhoods, which means that they organized it, they designed it in a way that you alone as an NGO or an organization, you cannot apply for it. You have to create a local little network. You have to work with at least one other organization, but preferably more, and you have to work on this together. And there will be no lead applicant. There will be several applicants that are on the same level, and they have to learn how to work together locally. So this creates very strong local networks that creates spaces like this, for example, a community center, or this, which is like a social cooperative that runs a hotel and hostel in Lisbon. And again, these are very important services because cities like Lisbon that is suffering from tourism a lot, but also gains a lot from tourism. So the big question is, how do you channel all this money into local neighborhood economy through exactly these kinds of actors that can be facilitated by the municipality, by specific funding programs, and especially if you help local actors to work together in networks. And what's even more important in the Lisbon case, that it is one of the few cities in Europe that, based on this experience of problematic neighborhoods, creating local networks, working with the municipality, they also adopted one instrument that the EU actually offers to all cities, but very few cities use it. It's called the community-led local development, which means that there's a specific amount of funding, in this case about 3 million euros, that community-led local development networks can decide together about. So in this case, in Lisbon, we speak about a network of 150 organizations coming from all the problematic neighborhoods of Lisbon, who decide together about how this money should be spent, about important decisions, about important competitions. So this is a very important, actually, tool of participation, because here we speak about serious stuff. We speak about money, we speak about collective decision to decide about money, and we don't speak about individuals coming from very different neighborhoods that don't know each other. We speak about locally based networks that already know each other, and they can represent actually what their areas need. But this is only some examples, and I think in our region, I was really happy to discover a few years ago that actually Dea Vidovic with the Kultura Nova Foundation in Zagreb, she's working on this on an even more structured and large-scale way.
Thank you. First of all, of course, I would like to thank to the event and to the organizer who invited me to be here with you and to share a little bit of my experiences and information. It's a really pleasure to be with you and to spend this morning and the afternoon together. So I will talk mostly about arts and civil society organization and focus on the building networks relations and see how we can build trust between each other and what can motivate us to work together and to create some new knowledge or some new information and sharing between each other. What is also very interesting that only my slides do not have any pictures, so a lot of text is here. But I will try to be interested as my colleagues were. So a little bit about Kultura Nova Foundation. Why I want to start with presenting institutions for which I work from 2011 exactly. Because this Kultura Nova Foundation is a public foundation established by the specific law on Kultura Nova Foundation adopted by the Croatian Parliament in 2011. But the initiator of the whole institutions and the idea of establishment of separate foundation for the civil sector in contemporary arts and culture came from the civil society organization. Exactly from the non-profit, non-governmental association which work in the field of arts and culture. It was one of the ideas, one of the suggestions how to create some bridge in the cultural system which would be much more helpful for the NGOs, which became very important player in the cultural system in the last 20-25 years, and the fact that the Croatian cultural system continued to work based on the model which we established during the social time, and many things changed in the last 20-25 years. So being aware of the fact that any serious changes and transformation of cultural system needs and takes time, the civil society organization came out with the idea of establishment of a separate foundation. And it is exactly the results of very successful bottom-up initiatives, which start in 2004. At the end, after 7 years, we got the law on Cultura Nova Foundation. And our purpose defined in this specific law on Cultura Nova Foundation, we used the lottery funds for funding the foundation, and you see that we increased our budget in the last few years several times. So we started with 400,000 euro, and last year our annual budget was 1,700,000. We work as a grant-making and operating foundation. It means that we have our grant scheme, and through this program we support different kinds of networks and collaborative platforms, and some of them I will present you. And also we work as an operating foundation through our research and development programs. But now I'm going to focus a little bit on networks, but of course I will not talk about our context, because all of you are completely aware that we are in some kind of the era of networks, which is of course also some of the products or results or imperative of neoliberal capitalism. That's also the fact. But also it's the results of the development of different technology, informational and communicational technology, which influence our society, but also our society influence this kind of the development. So the new circumstances in which we live in the last 30, 40 years created a lot of possibilities for networking and interactivities. And exactly the networks are really adaptable to very unpredictable demands. So what is exactly the network? It's an umbrella of different kinds of organizations and or individuals, depends on the local context, depends on the common interest and the common needs of the members who decided to come together and to work on some issues and some things. Members of the networks have a real benefit for being part of some networks. It could be sharing of information, sharing of knowledge, creating new joint projects, creating some new possibilities, and also it is a really good base for advocacy and for the lobby, and to increase visibility of actors, of members who come together and started to work together. We can, looking in the last 30 years, we can see different kinds of the networks. The first networks, which established work mostly, dominantly, as a representative network, as an informative network. So being a part of some networks could legitimize your work, you know, and you use as a member as some kind of the proof that you are working good way. But after years, networks started also to be operating networks or collaborative platforms for tactique networks, which means that they started to produce some new knowledge and to share the knowledge between each other. It's of course a very non-bureaucratic, horizontal, flexible, and transversal structure. Decentralized way of working is one also of characteristic of different kind of networks. Most of the networks, but it's not something what is necessary, have legal constitutions, of course, and they have a democratic decision making, and all decisions exactly made by the assembly, the active members. This kind of the participation, really active participation in the creation of the network is crucial, of course. And depends on the local context, depends on the countries, on type of networks. Each network needs some kind of the coordination office or secretariat, or depends how they decided to call or to define. I will give you one example of a Croatian network, which now we as a Kultura Nova also support. But when we started to thinking about our plan scheme, the culture networks and what they did since 2002 inspired us as a representative of Kultura Nova. So what we wanted to do, to create a framework to encourage other organizations to come together and to work in not, of course, in the same direction as a culture work, but to create a framework to give them better condition to work together. So the culture is exactly the program platform, and the highlights of this Croatian network of NGOs in a culture which established in 2002 is a culture as a process of exchange. So what is the main purpose, main idea of the culture is program exchange. The goal is a decentralization of the cultural production and the distribution in Croatia, which mostly very centralized, and everything happened in Zagreb. So culture came out with the idea to create a program model for exchanging and sharing for the members. They fund money and then invite all members, but also other NGOs who are not already the members, to apply, to suggest some joint projects and the programs of exchange. The basic criteria is involvement of minimum 3 organizations from different cities, minimum 3 cities. And the criteria for inclusion to being a member of the culture is exactly the program activity. How they decided about the project who will get finally financed and who will implement is a model of participatory grant making, meaning peer-to-peer review. They all together come and evaluated all proposals. So all members of the assembly and all other NGOs who proposed their projects. So, and this kind of the model really motivated other NGOs to be together for a year since 2002. And they also, besides the program exchange, started and initiated some other projects in the area of education, but also in advocacy. And the culture was one of the main network which would involve in the advocacy process for fighting for Kultura Nova Foundation. But also the culture network, together with some other cultural networks in Zagreb, established probably one of the most visible and most important initiatives right to the city, which protest and fight for the pedestrian zone in Zagreb, in Varšavska. So everything in Zagreb came from the independent cultural scene. A lot of changes and a lot of influences on our cultural policy framework, but also in other policy framework. Why? Because a lot of organizations, a lot of people come together and encourage, empower each other to work together based on the common interest and common needs. Now I will jump to the participatory governance just for a while. On this issue, we will continue to work more deep afternoon during the workshop. We will talk about the methodology and we'll see how it could help us to work together. But basically, why we also as a Kultura Nova open up this topic in our institutions, because through the grants program, through which we support a subnational platform which work as an advocacy platform, trying to change cultural policy, we recognize that most of them focus on the social cultural center based on the model of participatory governance and some kind of the civil-public partnership. They started to use the former abandoned buildings, military buildings, factories, and so on, using between different beneficiaries, different users, using this public infrastructure and try to establish a partnership with the public authority, using the idea of participatory governance. We recognize that they need much more support besides the financial support, some kind of the structural and professional support. So we started to work also on this issue of participatory governance, which exactly is the model for improving the quality of democratic institutions because of inability of representative of political democratic apparatus to change and to improve democratic institutions. There's the basically synergy between civil and the public sector. So I will stop here because I suppose that I'm completely run out of time. Because we will continue to talk about this issue afternoon and see how or which kind of the methodology is necessary when we want to use this kind of the concept in our practices. How we can share really responsibility in governing of a budget, programming, or cultural resources. So we have plenty of examples in Croatia, but we can also find a lot of examples around Europe, and especially in Latin America and some in India, and of course outside of the field of culture, because it's exactly established in other fields. Yeah?
Thank you very much. So as Dea said, if you want to get to know more about the methodology, you have to stay with us in the afternoon as well. So we will have a workshop between 2:30 and 4:30 before the final closing event. So join us here on floor 2. We will give you the details later. But we still have some time for discussion. And also, Dea was very modest. She didn't mention that they just published their book on participatory governance of culture that you can download from the Kultura Nova website. But this is also the occasion now to get to know some of the details if you're interested. Because we have here Dea and Miguel to answer your questions. And of course, you can take a few minutes to think about your questions, and I can start with the first one. But maybe you want to come out with me?
Wow.
Because something that I find quite spectacular in both of your work is that I know there since more than 10 years, and you come from the independent cultural scene. And as you mentioned, the independent cultural scene now gave people for the Zagreb municipality, they're in the city council. They gave people to structure the cultural funding policy of the country, practically. So I'm really curious of this transition, how the independent scene grows into institutions and actually enters institutions and shapes politics and policies. And the same thing for Miguel, because you come from an architecture office and also an NGO that works on bringing together citizen initiatives. But also you in the last years, you started to work very intensely with the city, and you actually brought them a proposal based on your mapping that, look, we have this map, we have all these initiatives, you could think of connecting them, you could think of creating some strong local networks of different economic activities, no? And then you got the city got a very big funding of 5 million euros for to do this. So you both had your way from the very bottom up into the institutional. So I'm curious a little bit, how did you experience this transition, and how did you see that you can still keep to the original ideas, original activity, or how does your practice change when you enter into institutions?
Can I start?
Please.
The first what's happened exactly, the independent cultural scene became aware that they're exactly the political fact. This kind of awareness came out in the beginning of the 2000s, and then people first in Zagreb come together and created some policy forum, organizing very often different kinds of meetings on different topics, and started to think about the cultural policy and how to influence, how to change the cultural policy. And of course, that this kind of activities wasn't the first or vicious idea of any representatives of any NGOs, but it was necessary, in order to change something. And step by step, organization became stronger and stronger, and we got in Croatia some kind of changes in institutional framework, which also influence and strengthen the civil society as a whole, but also civil society in the field of art and culture. But changing the position, of course, that the influence a way of your working. So, of course, that the Input Uranova Foundation, as you could see on the first slide has decision-making bodies defined in law of Uranova Foundation. It means that it's a hierarchical foundation, hierarchical institutions. But since people who work, or some of them, work previous in the civil society sector, they also I bring this experience and try to create much more or most transparent institutions, very progressive and very advanced public institutions in the Croatian context. And the whole time, what was the really crucial for us, listening what's happened on the ground. So to balance between the top-down and the bottom-up approach is definitely the most important thing. So through this project, which we developed in the last 2 years about participatory governance in culture, we took the role of matchmaker to help different stakeholders who come together on the idea of participatory governance. From one side, the representative of civil society, organized civil society, then local authority, but also community, to build trust between each of them, between the same kind of the actors in one of group. So this mistrust is one of the biggest problem in the Croatian context.
How about Madrid?
Well, I think we've been losing sovereignty for a long time, and citizens felt that they left their daily life to the companies, to the public administration, to other agents, and people were not involved. So we trust in another ways to do tourism, to do for the food, for mobility, for economy. So everything in our daily life is done by others. So we lost completely our sovereignty, and we do tourism in these hop-on, hop-off buses on the cities. And in Spain, I think the crisis somehow visibilized that problem. Of course, we had a financial crisis, let's say housing crisis, political crisis also, but I think the good point was there are a lot of people which are there was a repoliticization of the daily life. So many people understood that their daily life was left to other agents, and they were not owners of their own daily life. They eat, they dance, they use technology made by others, controlled by others, and I think many people try to recover sovereignty. And most of these social initiatives and civic initiatives, they are trying to recover sovereignty. Like, we will do things by our own, and we exactly know what we're doing and what is the purpose for that. And this is a good point. So now we're changing again, I guess, the economy flow. And now we are trying not to lose all this innovation which happened during the last 10 years, at least in Spain. So now it's time to get sustainability to these initiatives. Otherwise, we have the risk to lose all this innovation and knowledge, and people will join companies or will join another jobs. So we're trying to, let's say, help those initiatives to be sustainable and to be involved in the new wave, in the new flow, and keep going their like daily life, but with resources and funding in order not to lose all these innovations.
I was wondering if you could shed a bit more light in terms of how the mapping tool that you showed, how it works, because I noticed that the civic activities that were showing were mainly in Southern America, thereabouts, but there was really nothing on, say, for example, Australia or Africa. So if I wanted to understand what was happening in those parts of the world, how can I use the tool in order to actually get information from those parts of the world?
I will try to answer briefly. The tool is wide open, it's globally. Right now it's in 3 languages, Spanish, English and Portuguese, but let's say our A or B phase, our pilot phase, is joined with Ibero-American Secretary, which gathers the 20 something countries in Ibero-American region. So this is the big pilot. We will try to reach 5,000-6,000 initiatives in every country, in the main cities. And we are now trying to expand the experience in Ibero-America, which is a little bit easier because of culture, language, etc., to Europe mainly. And it's open to all continents, but we need to find local partners, we need to find cultural spaces where we could develop the workshops in order to explain the tool, and then we have what we call the embassy, the ambassadors, which are people which activates the local nodes in order to get an upgrade of the initiatives, but we will talk in the afternoon.
Thank you for the presentations, and I look forward to the afternoon session. I wanted to ask one question that it seems to me that the civic initiatives in the area of culture and arts are somehow more easily accepted. What about the cooperation with the research? How are your initiatives, civic initiatives, accepted by research community?
It's a really huge gap which we have in our research area for arts and culture. So just to give you one example, the last analysis of the whole cultural sector made in Croatia in 1998. So, can you? Thank you. So we do not have any real real analytical background for making a serious decision in the field of arts and culture. And because of that, Kultura Nova Foundation I mentioned, establish and work also as an operating foundation, establishing research and development department, through which we also conduct different kind of the research. Till now we have 3 research. One is about working condition of society organization in the arts and culture. The second one is about the education for the cultural sector. And the third one on participatory practices and tendencies, participatory governance practices in Croatia. So why we decided to do that? Because we wanted to invite a researcher to work with us and to create arguments for our further development and working and fighting or advocacy for changes.